Good day everyone, so let's talk about Chevreuse and do a detailed breakdown of the character. In the background here you'll see me running Chevreuse with Uemia, and no doubt you would have seen other content creators as well running their builds and their characters, but very often it's difficult to contextualize what this means. Is what you're seeing in the background actually good? Is it going to be good for you to pick up Chevreuse? That's really what I want to dig into today's video. So what I'm going to do is use Uemia here just as an example, and then I'll use Yai as an example of how vertical investing can really affect everything. So to get started, here is the damage that my Uemia does. Now, whether you consider this to be good or not, that is the baseline that we are going to use. So hopefully you've seen the numbers. There you go, even 12k whenever her burst procs. So now what happens when we slowly start adding buffs? So the first thing I'm going to do is use Uemia with Bennett, and then we'll just see what the effect's going to be for Uemia. So there you go, there's Bennett, there's Uemia, and you can see that the numbers have certainly gone up by quite a bit. You'll also notice that when I trigger her burst, her damage has gone up from 12k to about 20k. Definitely the value that someone like Bennett provides. So here's the question, what is Chevreuse going to provide us? Well, she'll help shred the opponent's electro and pyro resistance as long as we can trigger an overload reaction within 6 seconds. And if we use her hold E ability or tap E ability, we'll also get an additional attack buff that's based off of her max HP. So you'll see now here in the background that the numbers have now gone up even more. And this is typically as you'd expect. Now, since there is no more Electro on the field, we've lost the overload buff, and this is immediately what you can see some of the problems might be with Chevreuse. How do you keep the buff uptime? So whilst you can get an attack buff and you can get, let's say, an elemental damage buff with her C6, the big thing is really shredding the opponent's resistance, because that gives you an additional multiplier that's going to hit very, very hard. And I want to demonstrate this by showing you just how my C6 Yai looks. So you can see she's doing quite a bit of damage. That's just 31k on her own. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the better your units are, the better your artifacts are, the more insane these buffs start to scale. And that means that the damage that they're going to do will be really, really big. So without even triggering an overload reaction, you can see that Yai went up from 30k to 54k. This is just like what we mean by vertical investment. The better your characters are, the better, the higher their talents, the more you're going to get out from buffs. And finally, we're going to add in Chevreuse right here as well. And here is a bit of a quick spoiler, we're going to get 69k, there you go. So basically from 31k to 69k, that's more than doubling the damage output. And this damage output in absolute terms obviously scales the more your units scale as well. So let's look at a couple of practical team comps. You can see here with the Raiden Shogun that I'm using Xiangling to get a high uptime on the buff. There is another variant that I've shown in my previous video with Bennett, where you can do an excessively high amount of damage, but you won't have the buff uptime because there's no off-field pyro unit. This, I would say, is also perhaps one of the current things we are missing in Genshin Impact, is suitable competition for Xiangling, so hopefully that will come in the future. But one thing that I've very deliberately done here in the background is waste my team's DPS or my team's energy potential, because I want to talk about another thing that might be problematic with someone like Chevreuse, and this is something a lot of people don't talk about, and that is, how do you recover from having low energy? So something like a Neo Bloom team is really not going to suffer from energy issues that much, because their elemental skills can really carry it out, or still carry the team. But in a case where you have zero burst energy on your Raiden, what should you do? This is something not a lot of people talk about, but you can see here the strategy was quite obvious. We use Chevreuse and we want to try and funnel her particles not to Xiangling but to Raiden Shogun. The benefit here is that the moment we have Raiden Shogun's burst up, we can battery the rest of the team, and then from a practical sense we can then obviously start getting into a rotation and making sure that we're ready for the next floor. In any case, the age-old advice of you always needing tons and tons of energy recharge, like so many fairy crafters will tell you, is not often as sensible as it seems. It depends on what the enemies are going to do, it depends on the breakpoints of the enemies, how you use your abilities, etc. But that is certainly a topic for another video. So getting back to Chevreuse, one of the other things that you need to be aware with the character is that if you have her at C6, there is a bit of a timing window in order to get the maximum buff. So whilst you can play like I did here in the background in an accelerated way, in other words, you try and get your abilities on the field as quickly as possible, there are other ways where you might want to slightly delay before you go to Raiden Shogun in order to get the maximum stack from her C6 buff. The same applies obviously if you're using Xiangling as an off-field pyro applicator, so that you can just snapshot that buff and keep it and hit the enemies harder. Sometimes being slower means you will have a better opportunity to beat up the enemy. In fact, this is something that I even saw in my playthroughs. So for instance here I replaced Xiangling with Bennett, and whilst I was able to do quite a lot of damage, the fact that I can delay my rotation slightly here and I just have off-field pyro ticking means that I can do a lot more damage to this Hydro Tulpa. Now in the background I obviously pulled away because I wanted to show you that if played correctly, you should have that all of your units have all of their elemental burst ready for the next rotation. So the team that I just showed with Chevreuse certainly makes a lot of practical sense, and you don't even need as much ER on your Xiangling. I think a good lower bound would be something like about 170 for this Pyro Burst floor, but of course just play it out and see on your account, because your results will definitely vary from mine. Regardless, that's what I have to say about Chevreuse. I don't think there is that much more that she's really adding in terms of new gameplay. She's not really revolutionizing the overload. What she is doing is allowing us to discover a couple of niche teams and perhaps put together some combinations that we didn't previously think were possible. From a pure meta and speedrunning perspective, you don't need the awkwardness of trying to double swirl in order to get like good results. You just have it all available on a single quick overloaded reaction, which certainly if you look at what the speedrunners are doing helps quite a lot. So from that perspective I can understand the value of Chevreuse. I can understand what the Genshin devs were really going for, but I honestly think if I have to wear my skeptic's hat on, I don't think she's going to mean that much to the majority of the player base that don't have good artifacts, that cannot scale vertically with their characters. So it's going to be tentative. I do think that her biggest potential might still probably lie in the future with some upcoming units. From my perspective, it gives me a different way to play with my Raiden team, although I do wish that eventually we will be able to be lifted from the Xiangling curse of off-field pyro and we get something that's just a bit more fun than just Xiangling, but that's just my own personal opinion. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching and have a good day. Cheers.